on Antarctica, and in particular Mawson's Hut. And Eric, who saved, I guess, 40 years, I think he said, of his schoolboy dream of seeing Mawson's Hut. And he said the experience left him in awe of Mawson and his men. And I'll quote Eric saying, "I expected something a bit bigger. I couldn't believe that 18 people could live in that small area for so long. The thing that stood out the most was the fragility of it, more than anything, and yet it still stands." Gentlemen, let's welcome Eric Kelly.
Good morning, gents. It's all right, I thought that was me.
They're repairing the hut.
We're both in all things going wrong. First of all, I'm just a humble school teacher, but when I was in grade 5, my teacher at that time, he said, went through a program with the heroic era, and it just captured my imagination. Talked about Mawson and Shackleton and Scott and Mundston and all the Antarctic explorers, and I was just blown away as a 9-year-old. And I went home from school that day and said to Mum, "Mum, I'm going to go to this place called Antarctica." And she said, "Yes, dear," as mums do, you know. Well, I became a fitter and turner by trade, and then a toolmaker. But unfortunately, my skills weren't good enough to get me to Antarctica because I didn't have pneumatics or anything like that. So unfortunately, I couldn't get there that way. So as Simon said, 45 years later, my wife saw an advert in the Herald Sun, or the Sun as it was, I think, in those days, about a program that was coming to a hotel indicating a trip to Antarctica to Mawson's Hut. We went along, heard the presentation, walked out the door, and my wife said, "You're going, aren't you?" And I said, "Bloody oath." I don't care the cost. She knew what the cost was because she was with me at the presentation. I got my ticket and went home to Mum and said, "Mum, look, I'm going to Antarctica." "I always knew you'd get there." So, as I say, 45 years it took me to achieve my #1 on the bucket list, and nothing could have prevented me from going there, I hoped. And there I am now. I achieved it. As you can see by the date on there, the 9th of December in 2005 to the 2nd of January in 2006. So it was over Christmas. I'd never been away from my wife and kids at Christmas time, so it was a new experience again. But I relished it. I went to Antarctica with high hopes. You can see the size of the hut there and the comments that Simon made about living inside it. The main area is that bit. That's an engine room or a storeroom built on. But this is the main part. That's where the men lived. And there were 18 scientists. There was no builders, carpenters, tradesmen of any sort. And yet they built this hut when they first arrived in 1911. Okay? So, as you can tell, this was just before the 100 years. The 100-year anniversary of Mawson's Hut. So this is what we went down to see. It didn't occur straight away. There was quite a bit that went on before we got there, and quite a bit of hassle getting in there, but I'll explain that as I go through. One thing I will say, if you've got a question, please ask. I don't wait for questions at the end. I'd rather answer it so that you don't forget it at the end, all right? I know I'm getting old and I keep forgetting things that I should be asking, so just put your hand up or yell out because it's a bit clear looking at that way. Okay, Antarctica itself is that solid white mass in that area there. That's the continent of Antarctica. This bit around is the ice that forms around it during the year, all right, during the winter months. So it's quite doubles in size virtually by going the ice around the Antarctic continent. We left Hobart here on a Russian icebreaker. Now the Russian icebreaker had never been in the Antarctic waters. We'd done a lot of work in the Arctic, but never in the Antarctic. Okay, so we got on board this Russian icebreaker called the Marinus Fatava, and we headed off and we got to Macquarie Island out here in the middle of the Southern Ocean. And we stopped at Macquarie Island for a day and a bit. Then we travelled on down to Commonwealth Bay and Mawson's Hut and around this area for 6 or 7 days in this area. Then we sailed up to the islands here off of New Zealand. They're called the New Zealand Subantarctic Islands. And then we finished up in Bluff, right on the southern point of New Zealand. So that was my trip, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. All right? Leaving in Hobart, boarding in Hobart, you can see the ship in the background. You can see some helicopters on board. We'll talk about them a little later. And then there's this group of expectant people like myself, all hoping to achieve their dream of going to Mawson's Hut. Heading down the Derwent River, it's the same Constitution dock where the Sydney-Hobart race finishes. We were leaving Constitution dock and going the other direction for a change. Greg Mortimer was on the left with the microphone in his hand, and the Russian captain here. Anyone know who Greg Mortimer is? Anyone ever heard of Greg Mortimer?
He's climbed Everest.
That's the one. First Australian to ever climb Mount Everest without oxygen. Pretty impressive credentials, I'd say, but he owns the company that I was travelling on. But that's Greg Mortimer there, and he's still alive, he still lives in Sydney. Myself, sitting on the deck with my roommate. Never met him before I got on board the ship. He was a farmer from Albany in Western Australia. So, as I say, it was a very big mixed group of people. There were Americans, there were Taiwanese, there were Japanese, there were South Africans, there were Poms, and lots of Aussies. We did make the most of it. You can see me sitting in shorts. That's not uncommon. I live in shorts even in winter. I put it on trousers on today because I'm here. Right? Normally I'd be wearing. Yesterday I was walking around in shorts up in the Dandenongs at the tulip farm. All right. We got to Macquarie Island. Now Macquarie Island is out in the middle of nowhere, and most of you would probably know that Macquarie Island is where we get all our weather forecasts from. The weather forecast, the Bureau of Meteorology there, they do the weather forecast out in the Southern Ocean for what's going to happen in Australia and New Zealand. All right, so it's a pretty big area there. We did see a lot of things down there. These used to be the huts that the scientists lived in on Macquarie Island. The old Nissen huts from war days. But nowadays they live in a little bit better accommodation, like over in here. These are the areas now. They were doing a weather thing while we were there. Walking around on Macquarie Island, we were told, do not go any closer than 5 metres to any of the wildlife. But no one told the wildlife. All right? We walking through the tussocks, and there's an elephant seal right there, right beside me. You can't do anything about it. You do the right thing and move away. The same with the penguins. All right, the penguins were just walking around in amongst the grass. The grass was quite tall at the time, as you can see. I don't know if anyone knows, these are king penguins, and a king penguin comes up to about my waist in height. All right, that's how tall the king penguin is, approximately. All right, because I'm only a shorty.
Excuse me, had the rabbits been removed by this stage?
No, they had not.
Okay.
At this stage, they were in the process. I was just going to comment about the rabbits. That's all right, that's good. Someone knows a little bit about it. There was a program on at the time to eradicate all the rabbits from Macquarie Island, and it was 2/3 complete when we were there. We didn't see any, but we were told they were still there. Probably down the rabbit holes. Probably. So we saw the king penguins. Then we also saw gentoo penguins, which are quite small. They're about the size of our fairy penguins. No, they're called little penguins now. Sorry, not allowed to call them fairies. So they're approximately 6 inches high. All right, the gentoos. There is another breed of penguin on Macquarie, and that's called the rockhopper. But we could see them in the distance, but I couldn't get photos of them. So the other seals again sleeping in the tussocks. You can see their skin, how it's coming off. There, they peel off the skin before they can go into the water, the same as the penguin. The young males having a bit of a play around. These ones were only weeks old, we were told, 6 to 7 weeks in age, but they were already learning how to fight. Sorry, I'm stopping you from saying that.
Not at all. I can see right through you.
I didn't know the ear was that low. Come on, Simon, I know there's nothing in between, but gee. So the penguin, the seals, they start fighting, play fighting to learn how to do everything, just like we learn things as we're growing up, with our playing in mud and fighting with our brothers and mates and everything. It's the same for them. This is one of my favourites. I was just sitting looking at all the penguins in the distance here, and these couple of penguins, there's 3 of them actually, another one just out of shot in this photo. They come up behind me. What do? I'm sitting there looking, so I just sat there. They're a very inquisitive bird. They come right up to me and they grabbed hold of my hand, the beak around my hand like so, and eventually went all the way up my arm. As you can see, the beak of the penguin there, and he eventually tried it all the way up my arm just to see what is it? What's this thing being here? What is it? It's not a penguin. So, but you can see the number of penguins in the background, and that's only a smidgen of them. I put that photo into the Herald Sun a few years ago, just after I'd come back. They were asking for photos of trips, so someone took that photo of me, of course, and I put it into the Sun, and it got a highly rated mention. So I was pretty wrapped in that, just for the fun of it. The Royal Penguins was the 4th breed that was on the island, and they were especially inquisitive as well. That's my boot, and the Royals come right up and had a look and tried to bite my foot and everything like that. The Royals are about 8 inches in height. I'll say inches because we're all that vintage. I learned everything in inches, and I find it hard to use metres, and even to today. The Royal Penguins, they lived up on up on the hill, so to speak, from the beach down here, up the hill and into an area up the top. Whereas the king penguins lived on the beach. They congregated down on the beach, whereas the Royals congregated away and up on the hill. And they were coming down a little track that was just near where I happened to be. Walking down, they always moved around in groups. They didn't go in singularly at all. Just a couple of close-ups of the hairdos of the wind blowing the wind on the head. So, and they do mate for life. Penguins do mate for life. And they look after each other like that. King penguins by the score, as you can see here, all the way around. They went right around the other side of this bluff, and they were everywhere. And the noise and the smell was incredible. The noise was just, all the time, and the well, you can imagine approximately 10,000 birds all congregating in one area and all pooping in the same place. It stunk, and it did stink. But we put up with it just to see them. All right? They did mix. Didn't see a lot of them, but there are a couple of kings there and the royals all around. You can see the difference in height of the king and the royal.
Eric,
Yep.
Roger,
Roger, yeah.
Yeah. how long does a penguin live? Because it looks like they breed like rabbits.
They only breed usually one chick a year. Because the winter time they don't go in. The emperors actually breed in winter time. The others breed in summer. All right. These ones were in summer, but they only breed about once a year. Very rare do they have 2 eggs. Okay. So how long they live depends on whether they get caught out in the ocean when they're out fishing. But 20 years is a good length of years for them, so if they live that long.
What is their favourite food?
Fish.
Any type?
Small ones that they can eat and then regurgitate. So fish and krill. They do eat the krill as well, which is quite small. But they've got to be able to bring the fish back in their gullet and in their stomach and then regurgitate it for their partner and for their chicks when the chicks are born. Yeah. So the penguins, as I said, they don't go into the water at all by themselves. They will always go in as a group, and they can't go in until they have lost this down. All right. We all know of penguins as being black and white. When they're born, they've got this. Oh, no, that's all right. I pressed the wrong button, but it's all right. They've got this down on their outer body, and until that down disappears, if they go in the water, they will drown because the down is not waterproof. It will pull them under the water. Once they get rid of the down here, the black and white skin is waterproof, and they can go for a swim.
What does the down feel like? You know, is it
Like fur, like a fur coat, or the ladies' fur coats, the collars and things. Yeah, I didn't touch a bird, but we did touch. We were given some to see what it was about when it had fallen off them. But it was a furry type. But as I say, it's not waterproof, so it would pull the bird down. And they're only young. These ones here are only weeks old. It takes them about 6 weeks to lose their down completely, and in that 6 or 7 weeks, the parents have to bring the food to them. So it's yeah. Otherwise, they wouldn't live. Just yeah, it's quite a congregation, isn't it? What I've got here is these 3 big canister things here in the middle. Back in the old days, in the 1800s, the whalers used to go out and collect whales and kill them for the oil, right? They ran out of whales. So what did they do? They went and got penguins. And these things here on the shores, digesters, were what they put the penguins into, boiled them up, got the oil, and took the oil back to England and Australia, and so that we could have oil lamps.
Do you know why they don't live in warmer climates?
No, I don't. I've never even thought of it, actually. Because they don't live in the Arctic, which is just as cold as what the Antarctic is.
Yeah.
But the highest birds that I've seen were in Argentina, almost up to Buenos Aires, the Magellan penguin, which is quite warm up that height. But there's none around the equator or above it. They're all a southern hemisphere bird. Yeah, but I've never been informed of that, never even thought of it, to be honest.
Yeah.
No. But anyhow, that's what they were, and they're still there. As I say, these were in the 1800s. They used to put the birds in and boil them and get the oil, extract the oil, and of course the birds died. So they were decimated for a long time. Going swimming, as you can see, once they do lose their down, they do go in and practice to swim in front of the parents. So you've got the parents and that all up here, and you've got juveniles down here, and the parents going in with them as well to teach them how to swim, get them to, even though it's become second nature. I was lucky. I happened to walk around a promenade, a little point in the beach, and these three little pups were playing there. By the time I had my camera out, by the time I took one photo, I got that. By the time I tried to take a second, and they'd gone, and no one else saw them. I was by myself. There was people sort of 5 or 8 metres behind, yards behind me, and they didn't even see them. So I just happened to be in the right spot at the right time to see these little pups, and they were, as you can tell, very small. We left Macquarie Island after being there for a couple of days, and we headed south towards Commonwealth Bay, and first time I'd ever seen an iceberg, so I took a photo. You can see the front of the ship here. We were allowed to wander anywhere on the ship we wanted to. We could go up onto the bridge any time. We could go anywhere. The only place we weren't allowed was into the engine room. Everywhere else was okay, and naturally other people's accommodations. But ice flows out in the middle of the ocean. All of a sudden you'll come into the ice flows. Now an ice flow is not very deep. An ice flow is just snow that's landed on the ocean and built up. All right? It's not like an iceberg. An iceberg actually breaks off of a glacier and floats around. So the glacial ice, that's what it's called, it can float, and that's the one that's got more under the water than there is above it. Okay? Whereas the ice floe is usually only a 2 or 3 feet in depth, and there's not very much in the water itself. It's all above. Okay? But the penguins, they love it. The penguins can get onto the ice floes and just have a rest for a while as they're returning back from fishing, and then head off back to their nests. You can see over here the breaks in the ice, and that's just all it is. It's just a little channel where the two bits are floated together and haven't joined yet. They do join. They do join, and sometimes you get peaks. I thought it was in the next slide, but it's not. We arrived at Commonwealth Bay, and that was my first sight of Mawson's hut. We're coming in on the little Zodiacs, little rubber boats that held 12 people. We had 4 carpenters. They stayed for 6 days. We had 4 carpenters with us from the Antarctic division in Hobart, who were going down to rejuvenate the place, just to fix it up, make sure it was good for the 2011. They've been working on it for a little while. So we had them, and we took them ashore with all their gear and everything ready to do some work. We were all just wandering around. This is in what's called the windiest place on Earth. The majority of the time, the wind in this area, they're called katabatic winds, the winds in this area are upward of 150 kilometres an hour, majority of the time. We were lucky it was only about 70 to 80 kilometres an hour when we were there, which is pretty strong when you consider walking around here in 70 or 80 kilometre winds. But down there, it just sort of flowed, and it didn't affect us as much as I expected it to. Robin, one of the scientists we had on board, she was a scientist who explained all about Antarctica, about the penguins, about the wildlife, the sea leopards and everything that were all around us. I just got a photo of it beside Mawson's hut. Now you can see Mawson's hut here, and it looks like a hodgepodge. And it really is. As I said before, there was no tradesmen. These were blokes who were scientists who had skills up here but not very many skills down here. Okay, but they built the hut, and it's still standing 100 years later. Okay, but you look at the walls, they've got bits strapped across. The main planks are going up and down, whereas they've got other bits going across just to hold it together on the roof as well. So, and that's what it really looked like, a hodgepodge of timber.
Is it waterproof?
Yes, it was. To the extent that it, you know, you're inside, you didn't get, because it doesn't rain down there very often. In this area, it's one of the driest places on earth, and it doesn't rain. It's the wind and the snow comes around, and the snow got in certain spots, but no precipitation in that respect.
Is it insulated to keep you
No,
warm?
it wasn't. It was just the bare boards on the inside as well. So yeah, and you think of the winds, you know, 180 kilometre an hour winds, and all you've got is these wooden slats, and it's come through quite often. And you will see it. Show you a slide later where the snow has come in. All right, the carpenters got to work straight away. We were there for about 4 or 5 hours just having a walk around this particular area, and the carpenters got work straight away and started to dig away the ice. That the doorway is just in there, and they started to dig away the ice so that we could get in, and some of them started to do some work around. As you can see there, they've got their things out, their little generators and everything, so they could use their power tools and so on. One of the blokes was straight up on the roof because he could see some of the slats were pulling away, so he was straight up on the roof and repairing. And this was in the 4 or 5 hours that we were there, on the first day that we were there. Just to show you the timber, how the weather can deform a piece of timber. Now, you can see the grains there, and the soft timber in between the grain has been just removed with the wind. The wind has just completely taken it away. So, the end of it, just an incredible thing. So anyone that works with timber will probably have seen things like this, but this, over 90 odd years, this is what had occurred. Got to do it that way. Okay, we left the 4 carpenters there, and we went off for a while. For about 6 days we went off and left them there doing their work, and we went off and just sailed around to have a look around the peninsula, around the area, sorry, not the peninsula, the area we were in. This is an iceberg, all right? So this is one that has actually broken away from a glacier, and you can see the height in it there, but the depth below there is usually about 3/4 to 7/8 more. So you've got a metre there, you've got 8 metres below, using just simple figures. You know, that there was about 25 metres in height. So you can imagine the depth that went into the ocean. This is what I was talking about, the ice flow, which I thought I had earlier. Down here, the ice flows, these are part of the ice flow, where the ice flow has just been pushed together, and where does it go when it gets together? It has to go somewhere, and it comes up. So you've got ice flows that can look like icebergs, but they're not. It's just the ice flow that's been pushed together. So, and you can see down the bottom here where it's open leads, where it's all broken away, and that gets pushed together. So, an iceberg, some of the penguins, now these are a different breed of a penguin again. So we've already found 4 on Macquarie Island. We get down to Antarctica and we found another 2 down there, and the Adelie penguins are the most prolific. They were everywhere, and they're only small too. They're about 7 or 8 inches in height, and they're the most prolific on the Antarctic continent. Okay, I'll show you, you'll see a lot of these in a minute. But when they go swimming, as I said, they rest on their way back when they get their full bellies. They rest, they just jump up on an iceberg, rest for a while so that they can swim further back to get to their young ones. Excuse me. This was a little place we pulled into just to have a look around. There was a group of scientists that were preparing to go for an expedition just near where we were. They were French and Italians, and they were together. So we arrived and we decided, this is one of our little Zodiacs or rubber boats, and a group of us decided to do this walk, to walk up the top of the hill. We walked approximately 2 kilometres. It took us nearly 2 hours to get up this steep slope up to the top. When we got to the top, we looked and it was just kept going up and up and up. Had we continued to walk for another 2,000 k's, we might have got to the South Pole. Might have. Doubt it, but we might have.
Did you have special shoes to get
No,
up that
I had rubber
slope?
gumboots.
Right.
We all had gumboots on, which is a prerequisite. We had to have them on the ship to go onto the Antarctic. When we come back onto the ship, they had to be washed. Everything had to be washed clean and then ready to go back on, so we didn't contaminate either area. But yeah, so no special shoes, so that's why it took us so long. To come back down, it took us 20 minutes. Nearly 2 hours to get up there, but we got wet bums, sliding down like the penguins did on their bums to get back down here. All right, some didn't do it. I will say the age between on the ship, we had one girl that was 14 with her dad. We had 3 or 4 others that were about 17. Then mostly the parents were from 45 years of age probably, upwards to 92. We had a couple, one couple he was 92, almost 93, she just turned 92. All right, and they didn't do that walk there, but they did get to there, the 92-year-olds. And he was a former scientist working down in one of the Antarctic bases, Australian bases, and he just decided he wanted to go and see Mawson's hut. So they did, as you do. Sastrugi. Anyone know what sastrugi is? That's... Sorry? I thought someone spoke. Sastrugi is a part of the glacier, and it's how it's formed by the wind and the weather. All right, you can see how rough it is, how jagged. But that's a glacier coming down the side of the mountain towards the ocean, and we're on the ocean down here, and this is what sastrugi is. Now, think back 100 years, and the explorers used to manhandle sleds, wooden sleds, with all their equipment on board, and they dragged it with harnesses, right? Like any of you saw the Queen thing last night where the sailors were pulling the gun carriage. That's what they did. They had the things around their waist, over their shoulders to pull their sleds along with, you know, anything of 500 pounds of gear on board. And they dragged it through stuff like this to get to the South Pole or to get around in Antarctica. As I said before, the penguins, they don't like to go into the ocean themselves. Here they are all gathered on the edge. Who's going to go in first? Well, the ones at the back push the front ones. The front ones have to go in. Then you can see the gap in between, and there'll be a little rest. These ones are already going. These ones will wait until the ones at the back push the forward again, and in they go.
Collingwood does that.
Collingwood does that?
Pushing the back.
I'm an Essendon supporter, it's all right. But my wife is bloody Collingwood, so... Yeah, anyhow, I was only ever so pleased that Sydney beat them on... She's not here, is she? No. Yeah, so they push them forward and into the water. Of course, the reason they don't like to go in by themselves is what's in the water. There's the seals, there's the whales that all eat penguins. So that's why they don't like to go by themselves. Safety in numbers. This is the next set of penguins that we saw. And these are the tallest penguin there is. These are only chicks. They're only weeks old, and I mean weeks. Anyone see the movie? It was the March of the Penguins, where the penguins were in the middle of winter in a big circle, and they've got an egg on their feet, and they rotate in the circle so that not the same ones are on the outside copping the winds, and they keep rotating for the whole of the winter time, 3 months, with the egg on their feet and keeping the chick growing in the egg. The adult emperor penguin comes up to about my boobs, about my chest, about this height. That's how tall he or she is. Okay? The chicks are when they're born, they're quite small, but these ones here were only weeks old. And I mean 3 or 4 weeks old, not 6 or 8. These were only 3 or 4 weeks old, and you can see the height of them already. On one of the slides here, these are the adult Adelie, and these are the 3-week-old chicks of the emperor. So there's a great difference in size already. Of course, when the male incubates the egg, he looks after it until just before the chick is hatched, and the mother comes back from the ocean. She feeds the parent, the father, and he nicks off, and she takes over, and the chick is born with mum. So father's got to go out, get some food, so when he comes back, the chick is usually born, and he has to feed the chick. Then she'll go off, feed, bring some back, and so on it goes. They rotate. He'll look after it for a while, she'll look after it for a while. All the penguins do it, not just the emperors. But the emperors, they're usually a lot further away from the ocean when the chick is born, and they have to get to the edge.
The penguins, the various types of penguins, get on well with one another, or are there fights?
We, as you can see there, those two are intermingling. There's no hassles, but these are only babies, and these are adults. Back on Macquarie, we saw them mingling with the royals and the kings. We never saw any animosity between them. They don't interbreed, we're told, according to the scientists. They don't interbreed, but there's no animosity between them, and they seem to get on. We never saw anything like that to say that there was going to be any. So, again, just to show you the chicks. Again, you can see the down on the chicks here. You can see the down on the shoulders of the chicks, and they're waiting again till the down disappears before they can go swimming. So, and the adult Adelies here. Just another one there waiting. Okay, into the ice flow. We on the ship, we lived on the ship because there's no hotels or anything down there. We lived on the ship, and the ice. Quite often we just poke the ship into an ice flow and go for a walk. Get off the ship and go for a walk on the ice flows, and that's what we're doing here. You can see down.
Could you describe the ship?
Sorry?
Could you describe the ship?
I'll show you one in a minute of it, but it wasn't a very big, it's only 90 feet or something in length. It's an icebreaker, so the front of it is very heavily reinforced, and as an icebreaker does, it rides up onto the ice flow, the weight of it cracks it, and it drops down, then it goes a bit further, and it rides up onto the ice flow, and that's the way it works. But there was 100 of us passengers on board. There were 44 Russian crew, of which 2 could speak English and 1 could speak a little bit. The captain could speak hello and goodbye and that way sort of thing. But the two waitresses we had were the only ones that could speak English. If you spoke to any of the others, they go, as we did when they spoke to us in Russian. each day on board we had a little letter that come out, and each day we'd have a different word in Russian, and so we tried while we were there to learn some of their language, just to try and be pleasant. I can remember Dobro Utra, which means good day, or hello. So, right, so that's all I can remember. But I've had to use it several times since, because I've met Russian people on board cruise ships as waiters and that. And you say Dobro Utra to them, their eyes light up. Oh, someone could speak Russian. Oh, wow. And then they go at you and you go, that's it, only know one. Anyhow, sorry, I'm way late. You can see the penguins here and the people all walking around on the ice floes. In between, these are the leads or water. The water was very cold. It was approximately 1 degree Celsius at the time we were there. As you saw at the start, it was from December to January, so it's in the middle in our summer. It's 24-hour sunlight down there at that time. So there's our ship. So you can see it's not a very big one. Couple of lifeboats, they were just checking it while we were wandering around on the ice, having a bit of fun. We were parked in this bit of ice floe for about 4 or 5 hours, and we went out and played footy, kicked the football around and different things like that. Others just went for a walk, others just stood and just looked, you know, got in amongst the penguins like we weren't allowed to do, but you just stand still and they come to you because they're so inquisitive. Just a reflection of the ship. I got right up to the front, just took a reflection of it. This particular day it was only quite mild really, it was only minus 28, but I've got my shorts on, as you can see. But the thing is, you can see the length of the shadow of the sun, of my shadow. So even though it was minus 28, being the wind, the sun was bright, so bright it cast a big shadow out the front of me, and the sun was really beautiful, like you're sitting in a car with the sun coming through the windscreen and you know it's absolutely freezing outside and you're as warm as toast in the car. Well, it was the same there, even though we weren't inside. The sun was so warm and lovely, but the wind was quite cold, so if you got into it. So I was just taking some photos, as you can see, taking some photos. Someone got a shot of me because there was about 3 of us out of 100 people that were like me, that wore shorts most of the time. And the other people used to love taking photos of us because we were so strange, being in shorts. So just more views of the penguins and the icebergs. I did say earlier we had helicopters. We had the 2 helicopters here. You can see one 5-seater and a 4-seater, and we were taken to an iceberg. We had 3 different flights while we were on board over the time we were out there. We were taken to an iceberg one particular day. The people running the trip went first and put 4 paddles in a square, approximately 500 metres square. And that was our boundaries. We weren't allowed to go outside of those paddles. But we had a game of soccer up there. So 50 metres above the ocean, kicking a soccer ball around. So it was a bit of fun. Just a couple of views. I was in one helicopter and the other one was there, just showing the sastrugi underneath over the iceberg. And you can see the depth here by the shadows of the height of that. We were told it was approximately 20 metres. And you think of those blokes pulling sleds behind them, and they've got to try and cross this sort of terrain. It was just incredible. My hat come off to them, believe me, I was amazed. And again, just another pattern. The ice helicopter landing, coming onto the ship. You can see how it's made the lead here with, and all the ice flow all around us. And again, just landing on the icebergs and couple of 2 or 3 shots of that fascinated me. And lucky, being in the helicopter, as I say, we did it 3 times, so I got a few shots. 24-hour sunlight I mentioned, this was taken at 2:30 a.m. in the morning, out of my window, out of my porthole. Just some of the sky and the reflections on some of the icebergs that we saw, so just usually the women go, oh, when they see that. We went ashore several times. This particular place was Cape Jules. You can see the penguins in here. And one of our little Zodiacs coming and our ship out in the background there. And people getting ready to do an excursion off into the wilderness. Some of them are already gone. Of course, they don't have the dogs or anything like that anymore. It's all motorised nowadays, even when we were there. And they were preparing to go on an excursion for 4 weeks. They were talking about being away for 4 weeks, doing scientific studies on the ice and things around that area. So, again, it was the Italians and the French. We were just near a French Antarctic base called de Monteville, which we'll see in a minute. The actual area itself, the rocky outcrop of Antarctica, so it is rock, it's not all ice, but there's about 3 miles of ice in the middle, in height, near Mount Erebus, where the plane crashed many years ago. There's about 3 miles of ice. The ground, there's not very much down there, but there was, as you can see here, the rocky outcrops. That's me sitting by. This particular chap was Sid's his name, Sid Kirkby. He was the last Australian that had dogs in Antarctica. He spent 16 winters in Antarctica in different places, and he was in charge of the dogs when they were down there in the later 50s and early 60s, and he was the one that had to shoot the dogs because the Australian government said they can't come back, or the New Zealand government, they weren't allowed to leave Antarctica, so he had to go around and say, Susie, I'm sorry, bang. Frida, I'm sorry, bang, and shoot all the dogs, and he knew everyone by name. He was telling us about it, so very, very sad, but that was the government at the time decided that they weren't allowed to come back because of the foot and mouth or whatever the disease that they were talking about at the time. He was just aghast, but never mind, poor old Sid, he had to have that in 40 dogs he had to shoot. So, yeah, so it's not very nice. The only plant life that we saw was a little bush about this height. That was it. You can see it there just in a little rocky outcrop, and a bit of moss on the ground, which was only 1 inch or 2 in height. That was the only bit of plant life that we saw, that I saw anyhow, in amongst all the outcrops that were there. Okay, I had an SLR camera with rolls of film that I took most of my shots on that. I did have a little digital one at the time, which I'd never used before, but these photos were taken so I didn't know what I had until I got home. And as you can see here, it's an Adelie penguin, but at its feet is an egg. And if you look carefully, you can see a black rim around the egg. And I didn't know whether I got the photos or not. I was there, I was sitting there watching, and there was a breaking apart. Oh. And there is the chick. So I happened to be fortunate in the right place at the right time, sitting on an outcrop and watching a penguin being born. Absolutely incredible. That woman Robin that you saw earlier near Mawson's hut, she hated my guts. When I come back and told her what I'd seen, she said, I've been coming down here for 15 years and you go first and get something like that. I've never seen it, she said. She's got all my photos. Which a lot of the group shared. Some people went that way, some people went that way, etc. And if you had something that they liked, you know, we swapped photos. It was simple as that.
Eric,
Yep.
would you show us those 2 or 3 photos again?
Yep. All right, so you can see the egg breaking there. And just a closer up of it there. And the next one, you can see the chick just there. It was taken a little bit later. I waited until the chick was right out of the egg, and then the mother actually pushed the egg, the shell away. And there's the chick there. So you can see it there, down there, and it's black. It was completely black, the chick when it came out. So that was the down on it. So it was, but as I say, I didn't know what I had until I got home. A week after I got home, I got my films back from Kodak, and there was these beautiful photos. Even though I'd seen it all, I was wrapped that I got them all. Got the photos and they come out so well. Again, up in here. So, as I said to you, the penguins mate for life, and you can see the father in the background with the mother here. Others are on nests. They all congregated on a small area like this table. There could be 4 or 5 couples with their own nests, because all they do is get rocks and make it into a circle and sit inside it. And the other penguins come along and pinch their rock to build their nest, and that one comes over. It was a fascinating thing to see. Okay, we went to the magnetic South Pole. Now, when we were there, it was 80 kilometres off the Antarctic coast. All right, not the South Pole, but the magnetic South Pole. And I had a compass, like you go orienteering with, and the needle just kept spinning like a top. There were several of us that had just a compass, a little orienteering compass of some sort, and they were just spinning because we were right at the magnetic South Pole. The needle didn't know where to stop, where to go. So it was quite a sight to see, you know, with a compass on your hand and the needle spinning.
But the magnetic South Pole moves, doesn't it?
It does, and as I say, it was 80 kilometres off the shore then. Now, apparently, when I was talking to a group that went down not long ago, that was over 200 kilometres off the Antarctic coast. So it moves all the time. Every year it's in a different position. The captain took a long time to get to the right position on the ship. He was trying to find it. So,
Do you know why that happens?
No, that's just a quirk of, I don't know, I'm not a scientist. Just an incredible situation. So it just keeps, because of the rotation of the Earth, it's something to do with the rotation of the Earth, and that's all I can say.
It's the movement of magma inside the Earth.
Yeah.
And because the core is iron.
Iron.
Yeah. And if that moves, the magnetic
Fields all move as well. So there you go. As you can see by the group on board, this was all the passengers except for a couple here. This chap, his name was Colin, and he went to the top of Mount Everest with Greg Mortimer. He was his companion. He's a New Zealander, so no one took any notice of him. Sorry if there's any New Zealanders in the audience, but no one. Greg Mortimer got all the accolades here in Australia, of course, whereas Colin got all the accolades over in New Zealand to say that he was one of the first to get there without oxygen to the top of Mount Everest. Yeah, oh, sorry. I haven't got a clock, so let's get away. It's after 12. It's after 12 already. I'll slip through some of these glacier ones, and just to show you the wind, the force of the wind on the crystal, on the glaciers, how they change, the colours in the glaciers with the wind and the water. As I say, I'll slip through them. We did get some company, not a great deal of sea life, but we did see some killer whales. and we were fortunate enough to see 4 of them decide to jump out right beside our ship and swim away. Bit of showing off. We went to Dumont d'Urville, as I said to you. We spent a full day looking around Dumont d'Urville, the Antarctic base for the French. I'm a stamp collector, and I collect some stamps from 2004 and 2005, and it cost me about $2.5 grand for every stamp that they had, and my wife still doesn't know the cost. So I've never told her. I think she's worked out that it was pretty expensive. You can see the Nissen huts. That's the style of building that they have down there at that time, but they're like the Nissen huts that we see around the construction places, but on a much larger scale. This particular one housed 40 people, and it was 3 stories high. So, one of the ladies on board, her ambition was to swim in Antarctic waters, so she decided to bring her wetsuit and everything, went for a swim. This guy was a cameraman, so he went in with her just to make sure she was safe and took some photos of her underwater, etc. Sledding around, you can see the belly. They get so full coming back, the Adelie penguins, that they slide across the ocean and then across the snow, just using their flippers to push them along. More helicopter, I'll just whiz through some of them, just for the view, just to show. You can see a bit of the depth there, but from the height of the helicopter it was not easy to see. The Marinus of Batavia, that's our ship. We got back to Mawson's hut. We lined up to go in. We had 15 minutes inside, 3 people together. I got in at 1:15 in the morning, and that was the sky. This was as we were lined up. You can see the sky at 1:15 in the morning, how bright it was. Those are 2 young girls that were on board. The memorial cross for Ninnis and Mertz, and that's the plaque to Ninnis and Mertz. They were the 2 that went with Mawson when he went out for scientific expedition. They both died. Ninnis fell down a crevice with all his gear on board. His sled and everything went down the crevice. Mertz and Mawson continued on. Mertz succumbed to poison because they were eating the dogs. It was the only food they had left, and he died from poison. And then Mawson was stranded only 11 miles from the Mawson's hut for 5 days, and by the time he got out and got back, the ship had sailed. Anyone that's read anything about Mawson will know that he arrived in the afternoon of the morning the ship had sailed, but there were some guys that stayed back. Inside, this was my dream come true. As I said, 15 minutes we had. You can see the geographics there, the national geographics. We could read them, and they were almost 100 years old, and they hadn't decayed or broken, frayed up or anything. Some of the stuff that was in there was bottles of things that are around. On Mawson's wall he had his own little cubicle, and he had a calendar on the wall, and that was all that was left of it. Inside there, one of those jars with the wicker all around it that you get wine in Italy. I keep doing it the wrong way. Just inside the hut, and this was all there. This is what was still there. You can see different Coleman's mustard, Heinz stuff there. There's all this all around us, just the different. One of the bunks, that's Xavier Mertz's bunk. They all had their initials printed on the bunk so that they didn't go to the wrong one, because they were different sizes. They were built for each man. Xavier Mertz was 6'3", so they had to have a longer bunk than what the other blokes, some of the other blokes that were only 5'2", they had a shorter bunk. So they all had their own bunks and they had their initials on them. I said to you before about the snow coming in. You can see the snow coming through the roof up there and along some of the walls. But this here is the ladder to the 3 bunks. There's a bunk up the top, there's a bunk in the middle, and there's a bunk on the ground. And there was 18 blokes in this small room. Right? It was only about like an 18 by 12 tent. Remember the old 18 by 12 tents that we used to have, the white walls and the green roofs? When you go camping, if any of you did that sort of thing? It was, the actual size of the hut is only 20 by 20. That's it. So imagine the 18 blokes trying to live there for all through a winter with no way of getting out, with the katabatic winds blowing. Incredible. The acetylene unit in the roof for the lighting for in the winter, they dragged it in and lifted it up into the roof. How the hell they did it, goodness only knows. But they got it. More items around the wall. Coleman's mustard there, Capston's, what do you call it, tobacco? For Capston's cigarettes. More of the snow coming through the ceiling. You can see it just breaking through the gaps in the wood. And that was what it was like. Yep. 2 more. Okay. Leopard seal, one of the most dangerous ones around. That's what the penguins were most up against. They hated the leopard seal because they were very sleek in the water and they ate a lot of penguins. Just this guy here, he was a Yank on board, and while we had so much downtime, he decided to make his own Mawson's hut out of matchsticks. He brought all the matchsticks with him and then built the hut. I said we did have Christmas on board and we all had a Christmas Kris Kringle thing, and that was our Christmas, so I'll leave it at that. We did leave and go back to Bluff, as I said earlier, and when we got to Bluff, the winds were so bad that the ship crashed into the dock and did some damage to the dock, but fortunately didn't do any damage to the ship because it was leaving that afternoon with a different group of people, and they didn't see anything. On the way back to Hobart, they didn't see a thing. The winds and the seas were so rough, they couldn't land. They didn't see anything. We had helicopter flights, we went ashore that many times. The Southern Ocean lived up to its reputation in January. They saw nothing, we saw everything. So, luck of the draw. Maybe he was looking after me for my #1 bucket list. So, thanks for your attention. I'm sorry I've gone over time, I didn't realise.
That was wonderful.
Thanks for your attention. I hope you've learnt something. Have a good day. Enjoy.
Well done. Thanks.
Eric, that was fantastic. I don't you agree? It was absolutely a wonderful talk. I think I'm going to go right home and get onto Google and organise a trip to Antarctica.
That's happened once before.
Has it really?
Yeah, I did a talk one time and one couple contacted me about 8-10 weeks later and said, we're booked. So it has happened once.
Well, maybe twice. Eric, I'm so glad you achieved your bucket list, because if you hadn't, you wouldn't be here, and I thought that was the most amazing talk. And I have to say, I was told, whilst there's no hotels,
No.
Mev Connell told me there was a post office in Antarctica.
There is.
There is.
At the South Pole, but we didn't get to the South Pole.
Oh, right, okay. And one other question. Did you think he might bite you, that penguin?
No, well, I was a bit worried, but when he started biting my hand, there was no scratches, nothing, because they haven't got teeth. They've got just gums.
Anyway, it was the most wonderful talk, and I've got a little present for you here.
Thank you very much.
Which you can drink that at your leisure. And thank you so much for a wonderful talk.
Thank you, Jeff.